Dad called at 3 a.m. saying, "Your apartment building is on fire. Hope you have insurance." I started laughing. He asked, "Why are you laughing at a tragedy?" I said, "Because Dad, that building wasn't just my home." Okay, here we go. It's hard to know where to even start with this story, because it sounds absolutely insane, even to me. But I promise you, every single bit of it is true. I mean, can you imagine getting a phone call at 3 in the morning, your dad's voice tight with panic, telling you your entire apartment building is on fire, and your first reaction is to just burst out laughing? Not a nervous chuckle, but full-blown, almost hysterical laughter. That was me. And my dad. He was completely baffled. How could I possibly laugh when everything I owned was going up in flames? Well, the truth is, that building was more than just my home. It was complicated. So, for years, I was Audrey, 32, grinding it out as an artist in New York City. You know, chasing the dream. I grew up in this tiny, sleepy Midwestern town, Oak Ridge, where ambition usually meant getting a promotion at the local bank. My parents, especially my dad, Harold, were all about practicality. He was an accountant, lived by spreadsheets, always talking about financial security. My mom was softer, but ultimately, Dad's word was law. Their vision for me: accounting degree, stable job, maybe teaching if I was feeling wild. But from the moment I could hold a crayon, I was drawing. My high school art teacher, Mrs. Lee, she was the first one who truly saw something in me. While my dad just rolled his eyes at the stacks of art school brochures on my desk, Mrs. Lee helped me put together a portfolio. When I actually got accepted into an art program in New York, with a partial scholarship even, that's when the real battle started at home. "Art doesn't pay the bills, Audrey," Dad would say, his voice calm, but with that unshakable accountant's logic. "Do you know how many talented people end up waiting tables their whole lives?" Despite their objections, I packed 2 suitcases and moved to New York 8 years ago. I had this determination that felt like armor. But let me tell you, that armor got chipped pretty fast when I faced the reality of New York City rent. My first year was a blur of 3 different shared apartments, each one smaller and grimier than the last. I was working 2 part-time jobs, taking classes, and barely had any time to actually create art. Then, 5 years ago, I found the building in Brooklyn. Calling it not much to look at would have been a compliment. It was 6 stories of faded brick, windows that rattled with every passing truck. The lobby always smelled faintly of cabbage, and the elevator. It worked maybe 60% of the time. But the rent was surprisingly affordable for a 1-bedroom, and the bedroom had this incredible northern light, absolutely perfect for painting. The owner, Mr. Vasquez, was an old man who rarely fixed anything, but also rarely raised the rent. He'd owned the place for 40 years, operating more on handshakes than formal leases. My neighbors. They were a real New York family. Vanessa, a nurse, worked night shifts and would bring me soup when I was sick. Walter, a retired high school teacher, played jazz records way too loud on Sunday mornings, but nobody complained because his taste was impeccable. And the Patel family on the first floor, they ran a small grocery store a few blocks away and always saved the best produce for us tenants. Every time I called my parents, my dad would ask, "Have you gotten renter's insurance yet?" And every single time, I'd promise to look into it next week. But there was always something more urgent: art supplies, a dental bill, winter boots when mine finally fell apart. Insurance just felt like something I could postpone indefinitely. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. About 8 months before the fire, things started breaking more frequently. A pipe burst on the 4th floor, flooding 3 apartments. The back door to the building would be found unlocked, even though we were all so careful. Then, 2 small electrical fires in the basement, quickly contained, but still, concerning. Mr. Vasquez seemed distracted when we reported these issues, not his usual indifferent self, but actively evasive. Meanwhile, my art career was finally gaining traction. After years of rejection emails, and sparsely attended shows in coffee shops, a small but respected gallery in Chelsea agreed to feature my work. My paintings, which explored urban isolation through fragmented cityscapes, were actually connecting with people. The exhibition was scheduled to open in just 2 weeks from that night. The day before everything happened, I noticed these men in suits walking through the building, clipboards in hand. They definitely weren't the usual maintenance guys. Expensive shoes, hushed tones. When I asked one who they were, he just gave me this bland smile and said they were just doing a standard inspection. I was too busy, too exhausted, to question it further. I just finished 3 new large canvases for the exhibition. That night, I fell asleep surrounded by the smell of paint and possibility, completely unaware that it would be my last night in that apartment. The harsh ringing of my phone cut through my dreams at exactly 3 a.m. I fumbled in the darkness, knocking over a water glass before finding it. The screen was blindingly bright, and it took a moment to register my dad's name. Dad, my voice was thick with sleep. What's wrong? Is Mom okay? Audrey, I just saw on the news, your building is on fire. His voice was tight, strained with concern. They're showing it live, on national news. It looks bad, honey. Really bad. Please tell me you're not there. For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. My building. What did he mean? The apartment building on Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn, he clarified, his words tumbling out. They're saying it started on the third floor and spread quickly. The reporter said the whole structure might be compromised. He paused, that concern heavy in the silence. Please tell me you're somewhere else tonight. And then, this strange, almost uncontrollable laugh bubbled up from my chest. It wasn't a small chuckle, it was a full, almost hysterical laugh. Audrey. Why are you laughing? He demanded. This isn't funny. Do you have insurance, like I told you to get? Please tell me you listened, just this once. I tried to control it, but the laughter just kept coming. Finally, I managed to gasp out, Dad, I'm not in the building. Thank God, he breathed. But why are you laughing? You're about to lose everything. That only made me laugh harder. When I finally caught my breath, I managed to explain. I'm not home because I'm at the gallery. I decided to bring all my finished paintings here yesterday, since the opening is so soon. I was so tired after setting up that Sophia, the gallery owner, insisted I sleep on her office couch instead of going home. The irony of it all was overwhelming. After years of my father warning me about protecting my possessions, the one night I needed to not be home, I wasn't. And the most valuable things I owned. My paintings. They were safely stored elsewhere. My laughter faded, though, as a horrifying thought hit me. Dad, I need to go. My neighbors. I need to make sure everyone got out. I hung up before he could respond and frantically dialed Vanessa's number. No answer. Then Walter. Still nothing. Panic rose in my throat. I called an Uber, threw on my shoes, not even bothering to change out of the paint-splattered clothes I'd been wearing the day before. 20 minutes later, the Uber dropped me a block from my building. Police barricades blocked the way. The scene was pure chaos, absolutely terrifying. Flames were still visible from the upper floors, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Fire trucks lined the street, their lights painting everything in a pulsing red glow. Water from the hoses ran down the gutters, carrying ash and debris. I pushed through the crowd, scanning faces, desperately looking for anyone I recognized. The first person I saw was Walter. He was wrapped in a Red Cross blanket, his white hair wild, his face smudged with soot. He was arguing with a paramedic who wanted to check his oxygen levels. Walter. I called out, rushing over. Are you okay? Where is everyone else? He turned, relief washing over his soot-stained face. Audrey. Oh, thank God. We thought you might still be inside. They haven't finished searching all the apartments. My heart plummeted. Who's still missing? The Patels. Vanessa. The Patels got out early, he said, pointing to where the family huddled together near an ambulance. They're over there. And Vanessa, she was working tonight, thank goodness. But they haven't found the couple from 6B, or the student from the apartment next to yours. I spent the next hour in agony, watching firefighters go in and out of the burning building. The fire marshal, a stern woman with kind eyes, kept updating us. We're doing a thorough search. The fire seems to have started in a utility closet on the third floor. The building's old wiring may have been a factor. Finally, around 5 a.m., they confirmed everyone was accounted for. The couple from 6B had been staying with family. The student had been at his girlfriend's place. No one was seriously injured, though several, including Walter, were treated for smoke inhalation. As dawn broke, the fire marshal pulled several of us aside. I don't want to speculate, she said quietly, her voice grave. But some aspects of this fire are concerning. The point of origin and the rapid spread suggest possible tampering. We'll be conducting a full investigation. Her words hung in the air, cold and heavy, as we processed what she was suggesting. Could someone have deliberately set the fire? For the rest of that night, our little community huddled together at a temporary shelter in a nearby school gymnasium. The Red Cross gave us cots, blankets, basic toiletries. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now shared their stories, their fears. Some cried openly. Others just sat in shocked silence. I found myself in this weird emotional state. While I felt genuine grief for our collective loss, and so much worry about what everyone would do next, there was also this undeniable sense of relief that my paintings were safe. And this relief brought with it crushing guilt. How could I feel anything remotely positive when so many had lost everything? I curled up on a cot but couldn't sleep. My phone kept buzzing with messages, friends who'd seen the news, Sophia checking in, my parents debating driving to New York immediately. As the sun fully rose, I stepped outside the gymnasium to call my dad back. I'm safe, I assured him. Everyone got out safely. Thank goodness, he breathed. But Audrey, everything you owned was in that apartment. Please tell me you at least had renter's insurance. The question I had avoided for years now had its answer. No, Dad. I never got around to it. His silence spoke volumes. I waited for the lecture, I told you so. But instead, he just sighed again and said, we'll figure it out. Your mother and I will help however we can. As I ended the call, I looked back at the school, where my neighbors were beginning to stir. Whatever came next, I knew our lives had fundamentally changed overnight. By 8 a.m., most of us were gathered outside the police barricade, staring at the charred remains of our home. In daylight, the damage was even more stark, more brutal. The building stood like a wounded animal, windows blown out, the brick facade blackened. Water still dripped from the structure, and the air smelled of wet ash and melted plastic. Fire officials allowed small groups to enter with escorts to retrieve essential items. When my turn came, I was paired with a young firefighter, barely older than 21. We can only stay for 15 minutes, he warned. And only grab what you absolutely need. ID, documents, medications, that sort of thing. Walking into the building felt utterly surreal. The lobby, usually dim but functional, was now a swamp of water and debris. We took the stairs, the elevator was obviously a lost cause. Each floor looked worse than the one below, and by the time we reached my apartment on the 4th floor, I was bracing myself for total devastation. Surprisingly, my apartment had suffered mainly water and smoke damage. The fire had been most intense on the floors above and below. Still, everything was ruined. My clothes were soaked, reeking of smoke. Books had swollen with water, falling from shelves. The couch, where I'd spent countless evenings sketching, was waterlogged and stained black. I grabbed my passport from the fireproof box under my bed, a backup hard drive with photos, and a small wooden box with the few pieces of jewelry I'd inherited from my grandmother. As I was about to leave, I spotted my sketchbook on the kitchen counter, miraculously dry under a pile of mail. I added it to my meager salvage pile. Outside, insurance adjusters had arrived, clipboards ready. One approached me, efficient, detached. Name and apartment number, he asked. Audrey Wilson, 4C. And your insurance provider? I hesitated. I don't have renter's insurance. His expression shifted from professional to pitying. I see. Well, you should know that without insurance, you won't be eligible for immediate housing assistance or reimbursement for lost property. You can check with FEMA and local disaster relief organizations. As he moved on, Vanessa appeared beside me. She had come straight from her hospital shift, still in scrubs, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep. Probably both. Did you hear what people are saying? She whispered, her voice low. About what? I asked. About Mr. Vasquez. No one can find him. And apparently, he doesn't own the building anymore. He sold it 3 months ago. This was news to me. Sold it to whom? Some company called North Star Development. People are saying they've been buying up old buildings all over Brooklyn. As we talked, more pieces clicked into place, the increase in accidents, the mysterious inspectors, Mr. Vasquez's evasive behavior. A sick feeling coiled in my stomach. By noon, a small group of us tenants had gathered at a coffee shop across the street. Someone had created a group chat for sharing information, and rumors were flying. Walter, who had been released from the hospital, joined us with actual news. I spoke to my nephew, who works in real estate, he said, his voice still raspy from smoke. North Star Development has a reputation. They buy old buildings in gentrifying areas. Then, mysterious fires happen. And suddenly, they can demolish the place and build luxury condos. That's illegal. I protested. They can't just burn down a building with people inside. Of course it's illegal, Walter agreed. But it's also hard to prove, and they're careful. They make sure the fires start in unoccupied areas, usually at night, when most people would be awake to smell smoke. They're not trying to kill anyone, just destroy the building. As if on cue, a young man approached our table. Tall, curly hair, glasses, carrying a messenger bag with the logo of a local news website. Excuse me, he said. I'm Derek Sullivan, reporter with Brooklyn Daily. I'm covering the fire and was wondering if I could ask you all some questions. Initially, we were hesitant. Most of us were still in shock. But Derek seemed genuinely concerned, and Walter thought media attention might protect us. One by one, we shared our experiences, our suspicions. This isn't the first time I've heard about Northstar, Derek admitted after listening. There have been at least 3 other suspicious fires in their properties over the past 2 years. Nothing has been proven, but the pattern is concerning. He showed us research he'd already compiled. Northstar was owned by a larger corporation, which was in turn owned by an investment group. A tangled web that made it impossible to pinpoint who was actually making decisions. While we were talking, my phone rang. It was Sophia from the gallery. "Audrey, I just heard about the fire. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I assured her. "I was still at the gallery when it happened, remember?" "Thank goodness." "Listen, I know this is terrible timing, but I wanted to let you know, the exhibition is still on. In fact, several collectors have already expressed interest after seeing your work during setup." A small, fragile flame of hope flickered inside me. My art was safe, and the exhibition might actually be successful. It felt wrong to think about my career at a moment like this, but it was also the one bright spot in an otherwise devastating day. As I ended the call, I looked up. And there, walking into the coffee shop, was my father. He spotted me immediately, his face a mix of relief and concern. He had driven through the night from Ohio to reach me. "Audrey," he said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I had to see for myself that you were okay." For a moment, I was simply his daughter again, grateful for his solid, grounding presence. Then he pulled back, and the practical side emerged. "I've already called about temporary housing options. And I brought some clothes and basics for you." He glanced around at my neighbors. "Have you started filing insurance claims?" "Dad," I said quietly. "I told you. I don't have insurance." His expression tightened, but he just nodded. "Right. Well, we'll figure it out. The important thing is that you're safe." As the day wore on, our tenant group grew more organized. Someone started a spreadsheet of resources and contact information. Another created a fundraising page. Derek promised to investigate Northstar further and put us in touch with tenants from other buildings with similar experiences. By evening, we had our first direct contact with Northstar. A representative named Eliza Burke arrived at the coffee shop, dressed impeccably in a pantsuit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. "On behalf of Northstar Development, I want to express our deep concern about what happened," she said smoothly. "We're working closely with authorities to determine the cause of the fire." "When did your company purchase the building?" Walter asked pointedly. She smiled thinly. "I'm not authorized to discuss specific business transactions, but I can assure you that Northstar is committed to the safety and well-being of all residents." "Then why didn't you inform us of the change in ownership?" I asked. "And why were there inspectors in the building yesterday without proper notice?" Her smile never wavered. "I'm not aware of any inspections yesterday. Perhaps they were from the city." No one believed her, but we had no proof of anything yet. As she left, handing out her business cards, I exchanged glances with Derek. This was bigger than just my lost apartment. This was about a systematic exploitation of vulnerable tenants, and it was happening all over the city. That night, curled up on my father's hotel room couch, I made a decision. I wouldn't just move on and rebuild elsewhere. I would find out what really happened and hold Northstar accountable. Not just for myself, but for all my neighbors who had lost everything. The next morning, Derek and I met for coffee before he headed to the city records office. He had agreed to help me investigate Northstar, seeing a potential big story in their pattern of building acquisition and subsequent accidents. "The key is finding connections between the different properties," he explained. "If we can prove they had a financial interest in getting rid of rent-controlled tenants and then connect that to the fires, we might have enough for the authorities to take action." I spent my day contacting the other tenants, creating a detailed timeline of strange occurrences in the building leading up to the fire. Vanessa recalled seeing unknown maintenance workers in the utility room just days before. Walter remembered overhearing an argument between Mr. Vasquez and a man in an expensive suit about 2 weeks prior. My father, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated with my focus on investigation rather than practical matters. "Audrey, you need to find a new place to live," he insisted over lunch. "You need to replace your basic necessities. Let the police handle the criminal investigation." "Dad, the police aren't treating this as a priority," I argued. "To them, it's just another building fire until proven otherwise. Meanwhile, these developers are getting away with destroying people's lives." His expression was pained. "I understand you're angry, but you're not a detective or a lawyer. You're an artist with an exhibition opening in 10 days. Focus on that." "I can do both," I insisted, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. Financial reality was hitting hard. Without renter's insurance, I had lost roughly $30,000 worth of possessions. My bank account held barely enough for 1 month's rent on a new place, assuming I could even find one without paying a broker's fee. The gallery exhibition might bring in some money, but that was far from guaranteed. Over the next few days, our once tight-knit community of neighbors began to fragment. Some moved in with family or friends outside the city. Others found temporary housing through relief organizations. Our group chat became less active as people focused on rebuilding their individual lives. On the third day after the fire, North Star made their move. Eliza Burke sent an email to all former tenants, offering a goodwill settlement of $3,000 each in exchange for signing a release of all claims against the company. "It's a trap," Derek warned when I showed him the email. "If you sign, you can't pursue any legal action against them later, even if we find proof they were responsible." But $3,000 was tempting to many of my neighbors who had nothing. By the end of the week, I learned that nearly half had accepted the offer, including the Patel family, who needed the money to keep their grocery store running. My father became increasingly insistent that I come back to Ohio with him. "Just temporarily," he urged, "until you get back on your feet." The thought of returning to my hometown as a failure was unbearable. I had left 8 years ago with such determination, to prove that an artistic life was viable. Going back now felt like admitting defeat. The gallery became my sanctuary. Sophia had given me a key, and I often spent nights on the office couch, working late to prepare for the exhibition. My new paintings, born from the turmoil of recent events, had a raw energy that even I could recognize as powerful. Through Derek's contacts, we found a lawyer named Josephine Alvarez who specialized in tenant rights. She agreed to meet with the remaining residents who hadn't settled. "Building a case will be challenging," she warned us in her small office, crowded with files. "These companies are sophisticated. They create distance between decisions and actions. They hire contractors who hire subcontractors. Following the money and responsibility becomes nearly impossible. But not completely impossible." I pressed. She smiled slightly. "Not completely. But it will take time and resources that most displaced tenants don't have." As we left her office, Walter sighed heavily. "I'm 82 years old, Audrey. I don't have years to fight a legal battle. I need a place to live now." His words hit me hard. While I was young enough to couch surf and determined enough to seek justice, many of my neighbors were facing much harsher realities. The pressure intensified when I received a voicemail from an unknown number. "Miss Wilson," the professional female voice purred, "this is a courtesy call to remind you that pursuit of baseless claims can constitute defamation. North Star values its reputation and will defend it vigorously." It was an unmistakable threat. I played it for Derek, who looked genuinely concerned. "They're worried, which means we might be onto something. But be careful, Audrey. These people have resources and connections." My dad noticed my distraction during dinner that night. "What's wrong?" "And don't say nothing." I hesitated, then played him the voicemail. His face darkened. "This has gone far enough. You're coming back to Ohio with me tomorrow." "Dad, I can't. The exhibition opens in a week, and I need to see this through." "See what through? Getting yourself hurt, or worse?" "For what? An apartment you didn't even own." "For justice." I snapped. "For people who can't fight for themselves. Mr. Vasquez is still missing. Did you know that? What if something happened to him, too?" Dad shook his head. "You always were stubborn, just like your mother." It wasn't exactly a compliment. My exhibition preparation suffered as I divided my time between investigating North Star and creating art. Sophia began to express concern about the controversy affecting attendance. "Some of our regular collectors are connected to real estate interests," she explained gently. "I support what you're doing, but perhaps we could keep it separate from the exhibition." Even my health began to suffer. I wasn't sleeping well, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. The final blow came when Josephine called with bad news. "The fire marshal's report came back inconclusive," she said. "They couldn't definitively prove arson. Without that, our case is significantly weakened." That night, alone on the gallery couch, I questioned everything. Was my father right? Was I throwing good energy after bad, fighting a battle I couldn't win? Would it be better to take the settlement, modest as it was, and just start over somewhere else? For the first time since the fire, I allowed myself to truly cry. Not just for my lost possessions, but for the community that had been scattered, for the sense of home that had been stolen from all of us, and for the sheer powerlessness I felt in the face of such calculated greed. The night of my exhibition opening arrived with a strange mix of excitement and dread. The gallery looked beautiful, my paintings displayed under perfect lighting, my name on the wall in elegant typography. Sophia had even arranged for a photographer from a prominent art blog to attend. This could be your breakthrough, she told me as we made final adjustments. Try to focus on tonight, just for a few hours. I wore a borrowed dress and shoes that pinched my feet. My father stood awkwardly among the art crowd, clearly uncomfortable, but determined to support me. He had extended his hotel stay, unwilling to leave me alone after the threatening voicemail. The early reactions to my work were overwhelmingly positive. Critics praised the raw emotional landscape, the unflinching exploration of displacement. 3 paintings sold within the first hour, including my largest piece, which went for a sum that would cover several months of rent. I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I kept glancing at the door, half expecting North Star representatives to appear. Derek had promised to stop by later with updates on his investigation. Around 9 p.m., the gallery was packed when I noticed 3 men in expensive suits enter. They moved directly to Sophia, engaging her in conversation while occasionally glancing in my direction. My stomach tightened. Audrey Wilson. One of them approached me, hand extended. David Mercer, North Star Development. Impressive work. We're actually looking to commission pieces for our new building lobbies. The audacity took my breath away. You want me to create art for the company that burned down my home? He maintained his smile, though his eyes hardened. That's a serious accusation, Miss Wilson. One that could be considered defamatory without evidence. Why are you here? I demanded, aware that nearby conversations had quieted. To appreciate art, he replied smoothly. And perhaps to discuss how North Star might support your career. We're always looking to invest in local talent. You mean by my silence? His smile never wavered. I mean, create a mutually beneficial relationship. After all, rebuilding a life and career after such a loss must be challenging. Before I could respond, my father appeared at my side. My daughter isn't interested in your support, he said firmly. Please enjoy the exhibition, and then leave her alone. David Mercer's expression cooled. Mr. Wilson, I presume. Your daughter has talent, but talent requires nurturing and stability, something we could help provide. She doesn't need your kind of help, Dad replied. Mercer shrugged. As you wish. But remember, Miss Wilson, that reputations in the art world are fragile. Collectors don't appreciate controversy. As they left, the confrontation had been captured by several phone cameras. By morning, the video had spread across social media, paired with summaries of the building fire and accusations against North Star. My name was now publicly linked with the allegations. The next day brought both opportunity and threat. 3 more paintings sold as people became interested in the artist standing up to developers. But when I returned to the small sublet I had finally secured, I found the door ajar, and the few possessions I had managed to acquire strewn across the floor. Nothing valuable had been taken, but the message was clear. They knew where I lived. My father was livid. That's it. You're coming home with me today. Pack whatever you need. For once, I was tempted to agree. The intrusion felt violating in a way even the fire hadn't. But then Derek called with news. I found something, he said, excitement evident in his voice. Property records show North Star applied for demolition permits for your building 3 weeks before the fire. And get this, they applied for construction permits for a new luxury building at the same address 1 week before the fire. How could they know the building would be condemned unless they planned it? His discovery renewed my determination, but the break-in had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. That night, Dad and I had our biggest fight yet. This is not a game, Audrey, he shouted, pacing the tiny sublet. These people are criminals. They broke into your apartment. What do you think they'll do next? That's exactly why I can't stop. I argued. If I back down, they win. They'll just keep doing this to other buildings, other tenants. And what about your life? Your safety? Your future? Is this crusade worth risking everything? Some things are worth fighting for, Dad. You taught me that. He stopped pacing and stared at me. I taught you to be practical, to build security, not to tilt at windmills. No, I said quietly. You taught me to stand up for what's right. Remember when the bank tried to foreclose on the Johnsons' farm, and you helped them with their finances for free? Or when you testified against your own boss for cooking the books at your first accounting job? He looked away. That was different. How? You risked your job, your reputation, because it was right. I wasn't risking my safety. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I just don't want to see you hurt. I know, I said softly, but I need to do this. He left shortly after, returning to his hotel. For the first time since the fire, I was truly alone with my thoughts. The small sublet felt cavernous and hostile after the break-in. Every noise made me jump. Around 3 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep, I wondered if my father was right. Maybe I was being foolishly idealistic. Maybe this fight was too big for me. With dawn came clarity. I sat by the window, watching the city wake up, and looked through the sales information from my exhibition. Every painting that had sold represented not just income, but a connection. Someone had seen my vision and valued it enough to bring it into their home. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. My art wasn't just a career path. It was a platform, a voice, a weapon even. I could tell this story through my work in a way that might reach people who would never read a news article about tenant rights or development corruption. I called Sophia as soon as business hours began. I want to do a special exhibition, I explained. Something about housing injustice and community displacement, using materials salvaged from the building. There was a long pause before she answered. That's not what galleries typically do, Audrey. I know, I said, my voice firm. But it could be powerful and timely. Let me think about it, she finally said. But regardless, you should come by today. You have more checks from sales. The money from my sold paintings provided immediate breathing room. I could afford a slightly better apartment, art supplies, and basic necessities. But more importantly, it gave me the freedom to turn down Northstar's settlement offer when they increased it to $5,000. I reconnected with the scattered tenants, proposing a new approach. Instead of just fighting Northstar legally, we would fight them in the court of public opinion. Derek's articles had already generated interest, but an art installation could reach a different audience. Many were skeptical, but Walter surprised me with his enthusiasm. At my age, you learn that sometimes the indirect approach works best, he said. Hit them where they're not looking. Over the next few days, we gathered at what remained of our building, collecting charred pieces of the structure. Personal items too damaged to save, but too meaningful to discard. Each piece held a story, a fragment of our community's life. Derek continued his investigation, finding connections between Northstar and several city officials who had fast-tracked their permits. He also located a former Northstar employee willing to speak anonymously about the company's practices. They call it accelerated vacancy, he told us. They never explicitly order anyone to commit arson, but they make it clear that bonuses depend on buildings being emptied quickly. As word of our project spread, housing advocates and tenant organizations reached out to join forces. What had begun as a personal fight was evolving into a movement. One evening, as I was sorting through salvaged materials in my sublet, there was a knock at the door. Cautious after the break-in, I checked the peephole. My father stood in the hallway, holding a suitcase. Dad? I opened the door, confused. I thought you went back to Ohio. I did, he said, stepping inside. And then I came back. I've taken a leave of absence from work. Why? He set down his suitcase. Because you were right. About standing up for what's right, and about me teaching you that. He looked around at the art materials covering every surface. I don't fully understand what you're doing with all this, but I want to help, if you'll let me. It was the last thing I had expected. My pragmatic, spreadsheet-loving father wanted to join my artistic protest against corporate greed. I also brought something that might help, he added, pulling out his laptop. I've been looking into Northstar's financial statements. Public companies leave paper trails, and accounting has always been my specialty. For the first time since the fire, I felt a surge of genuine hope. With my father's analytical skills and my artistic vision, we might actually stand a chance against Northstar. That night, Dad slept on my couch, his presence somehow making the small space feel safer. Before falling asleep, I realized that amid all the loss, something unexpected had been gained. My father and I were finally seeing each other clearly, as adults with different strengths, but shared values. The next morning brought another surprise. Derek called with news that a whistleblower inside Northstar had come forward, someone with access to internal communications about the accelerated vacancy program. This could break the case wide open, he said excitedly. They've agreed to meet with us tomorrow. When I told my father, he nodded thoughtfully. That's good, but we still need to follow the money. Corporations like Northstar don't make decisions without calculating the financial benefit. As he returned to his spreadsheets and I to my art installation planning, I felt a strange sense of balance. The practical and the creative, working in tandem toward justice. It was a partnership I never would have imagined possible before the fire that took my home, but ironically might have saved my relationship with my father. With my father's help, our strategy evolved. While I worked on the art installation that would tell our story visually, Dad meticulously traced Northstar's financial activities, looking for patterns and irregularities. He set up camp at my small kitchen table, surrounded by printouts of annual reports and property records. They're hiding their liabilities, he explained one evening, pointing to a complex chart he had created. See these shell companies? They're designed to absorb any legal fallout while protecting the parent company's assets. His business knowledge proved invaluable as we planned our approach. We couldn't just expose North Star's illegal activities, we had to make it financially painful for them to continue those practices. The art installation took shape in a donated warehouse space. I created a scaled replica of our building using charred wood and melted objects salvaged from the site. Inside each apartment, former tenants contributed personal items and written stories about their lives before the fire. Walter's jazz record collection, mostly warped, but still recognizable. A child's drawing recovered from the Patel's apartment. My own paintbrushes, their handles blackened, but still useful. We named the installation Accelerated Vacancy, co-opting North Star's internal term. Derek's articles about the project generated significant interest, and housing advocacy groups helped spread the word. What had begun as my personal protest was becoming a community movement. Meanwhile, our whistleblower, a former administrative assistant at North Star named Tanya, provided crucial evidence. She had copied emails discussing preparation work at our building just days before the fire. While not explicit about illegal activities, the timing and language were suspicious enough to warrant investigation. They were careful never to put anything incriminating in writing, Tanya explained in a hushed voice when we met at a quiet cafe. But everyone knew what was expected. Clear the buildings quickly, whatever it takes. With this new information, Josephine felt we had enough to approach the district attorney's office. It's still circumstantial, she cautioned. But combined with the pattern of fires at their properties and the financial incentives, it might be enough to open an investigation. My father, who had initially been skeptical of our legal chances, now threw himself fully into building the case. He arrived one morning with unexpected news. I've been talking to some business contacts, he said, pouring coffee in my tiny kitchen. It turns out several of my clients have investments in the fund that owns North Star's parent company. They're not happy about being associated with potentially illegal activities. Can they help us? I asked, hopeful. They're putting pressure from the inside. Investors hate negative publicity. It affects stock prices. Our coalition continued to grow. Tenants from other North Star properties came forward with similar stories. Community organizations offered support and resources. Local politicians, sensing a popular cause, began asking questions about the company's practices. The installation opened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Despite the weather, the warehouse was packed. News crews filmed as visitors moved through the recreated building, reading stories, touching charred objects, experiencing a fraction of what we had lost. I stood near the entrance, watching people's reactions. Many emerged with tears in their eyes. Others looked angry. Most importantly, they all left talking about housing justice and corporate accountability. My father stood beside me, uncomfortable in the artistic setting, but proud of what we had created together. Your mother would have loved this, he said quietly. She always said your stubbornness would either be your downfall or your greatest strength. The exhibition received coverage, not just from local media, but from national outlets. A prominent news magazine ran a feature on the artist fighting big development. Suddenly, North Star found itself in an uncomfortable spotlight. Their response was predictable. First came legal threats, cease and desist letters demanding we remove specific allegations. When those failed to stop us, they launched a PR campaign portraying themselves as community partners being unfairly targeted. North Star Development remains committed to creating quality housing for all New Yorkers, their spokesperson said in a televised interview. These baseless accusations distract from the real housing issues facing our city. The pressure intensified. Someone broke into the warehouse one night, damaging parts of the installation. Anonymous online accounts began attacking my artistic credentials and personal character. Derek received warnings from sources that his job might be at risk if he continued covering the story. Through it all, my father remained surprisingly steadfast. When I expressed doubts after the break-in, he simply said, they wouldn't be fighting this hard if we weren't hitting a nerve. Our personal relationship healed as we worked side by side. I came to appreciate his analytical mind and unwavering principles. He began to understand my need for creative expression and social justice. We were still different people with different approaches to life, but we had found common ground in this fight. The district attorney's office finally agreed to meet with us after weeks of persistence. The assistant DA, a serious woman named Gloria Hayes, listened carefully to our evidence. This is concerning, she acknowledged, especially the pattern across multiple properties. But building a criminal case will be challenging. These companies have very good lawyers. So do we, my father responded. And we have something they don't, the truth. It was such an uncharacteristically dramatic statement from my normally pragmatic father that I nearly laughed, but Hayes seemed impressed by his conviction. I'll assign an investigator, she promised. But these cases take time. Sometimes years. Time was something many of our coalition members didn't have. Walter had moved in with his nephew in New Jersey. The Patels were struggling to keep their store open without the regular customers from our building. Others had been forced to leave the city entirely. We needed a more immediate victory. That's when my father had his breakthrough. "I've been looking at their inspection records," he said one night, spreading papers across my bed since the table was covered with art supplies. "There's a pattern of the same inspectors signing off on their buildings, even when there were obvious code violations." "You think the inspectors were bribed?" I asked. "I think we should follow the money." He showed me a spreadsheet tracking payments from a North Star subsidiary to a consulting company owned by the brother-in-law of the city's deputy building commissioner. This revelation energized our investigation. Derek began digging into the connections between North Star executives and city officials. Josephine prepared documentation for a broader corruption case. North Star, sensing the changing tide, made one last attempt to silence us. Eliza Burke arrived at my sublet unannounced with an offer that made previous settlements seem trivial. $100,000, she said, sliding a document across my tiny coffee table. Plus guaranteed housing in any North Star property of your choice. All we ask is that you end this campaign and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The amount was staggering. It would secure my future, fund my art career, solve all my immediate problems. For a moment, I was tempted. My father, who had been silent during her presentation, finally spoke. "And what about the other tenants? What about the next building North Star decides to accelerate?" Eliza's smile tightened. "This offer is for Miss Wilson only. We recognize her unique influence in this situation." "You mean you want to buy her silence while continuing business as usual?" Dad said, his voice flat. I pushed the document back toward her. "I'm not interested." After she left, my father looked at me with newfound respect. That was a lot of money to walk away from. "Some things are worth more than money," I replied, echoing what he had taught me long ago, though neither of us had realized I was listening. The next week brought our first major breakthrough. Based on the evidence we had gathered about the suspicious inspections, the city launched an official investigation into the building department. 2 inspectors were suspended pending review of their cases. Then came the news that investors were withdrawing from North Star's parent company, causing their stock to drop. Financial pressure often succeeded where moral arguments failed. Finally, nearly 3 months after the fire, the district attorney announced a formal investigation into North Star Development for fraud, reckless endangerment, and potential arson conspiracy. It wasn't a conviction, but it was a start. More importantly, it validated what we had been saying all along. We weren't just disgruntled tenants or conspiracy theorists. We were citizens demanding accountability. The night of the announcement, my father and I celebrated with takeout Chinese food in my sublet. As we ate from cartons, sitting on my second-hand furniture, I realized how much had changed between us. "I'm proud of you, Audrey," he said, reaching for the last egg roll. "Your mother always said you had fire in you. I used to worry about that. Now I see it's your strength." "I couldn't have done this without you," I admitted. "Your spreadsheets and financial detective work made all the difference." He smiled. "Maybe we make a good team after all. The artist and the accountant." As we clinked our water glasses in a toast, I felt a sense of peace. Despite all the uncertainty still ahead, whatever happened with North Star, my father and I had found our way back to each other through this fight. Some buildings may have burned, but other foundations had been strengthened. 1 year after the fire, I stood in the courtroom as the verdict was announced. The case against North Star had moved surprisingly quickly. Once the corruption connections were exposed, 3 executives now faced criminal charges, including conspiracy and reckless endangerment. The company itself was ordered to pay substantial damages to all former tenants. My father sat beside me, his hand reaching for mine as the judge read the decision. His temporary leave of absence had turned into early retirement, as he dedicated himself fully to our case. Together, we had navigated the complex legal system, gathered evidence, and supported our community of displaced neighbors. The victory felt surreal after so many months of struggle. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered as Josephine made a statement on behalf of all tenants. "Today's verdict sends a clear message that no corporation is above the law," she declared. "Housing is a human right, not just a commodity to be exploited for profit." That evening, we held a celebration at the community center that had grown from our advocacy work. The settlement money had been used not only to compensate individual tenants, but also to establish a housing justice organization and fund a new affordable housing development on the site of our former building. Walter had returned from New Jersey to serve on the board of the new organization. The Patels were planning to open a grocery store on the ground floor of the new building. Many former residents had secured apartments in the development, ensuring our community would remain intact. As people mingled, sharing food and stories, I found a quiet moment with my father near the windows overlooking the construction site where our building once stood. "Did I ever tell you why I laughed that night when you called about the fire?" I asked him. He shook his head. I always wondered about that. It wasn't just relief that my paintings were safe, I explained. It was a sudden realization that everything I thought I needed wasn't what mattered at all. For years, I had been so focused on proving I could make it as an artist, that I had lost sight of why I created art in the first place. And why is that? I gestured around the room at the diverse group of people who had become my extended family through this ordeal. To connect. To tell stories that matter. The fire took my possessions, but it gave me purpose. My father nodded thoughtfully. I had a similar revelation. All those years I spent pushing you toward security and stability. I thought I was protecting you. But sometimes the greatest security comes from standing up for what's right. Even when it's risky. The healing journey hadn't been easy. The first months after the fire were filled with shock and grief. I mourned the loss of my space, my routines, the small comforts that had made up my daily life. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we were fighting. Then came the anger phase, fueled by each new discovery about North Star's deliberate actions. That anger propelled me forward when exhaustion threatened to derail our efforts. It gave me energy to create the installation, to speak at community meetings, to face down corporate lawyers. The lowest point came when several key witnesses backed out, fearing retaliation. I nearly gave